Hi there. Thanks, Ivana, for the go-ahead. Thanks, everyone, for joining talk today. I'll be speaking about MLOps and how it generates resilience for data teams. My name's Shaun McGirr, and I recently joined Dataiku as AI evangelist. And before that, I was head of data science and business intelligence at Cox Automotive UK. I am coming to you live, as in really, truly live. So if you have questions, you don't need to wait till the end. Put them in the Q&A tab, and I'll try to weave them into the presentation if I can, or I'll leave plenty of time at the end to get to those. Okay, MLOps is obviously a feature of Dataiku's data science and machine learning platform, but that's really the last thing I'll say about Dataiku, if this is not a demo or a technology conversation. Today is about how we think about the underlying principles and how we recommend building your business case for MLOps. And that business case needs to explain to your stakeholders in their language, not technical language, why MLOps is needed, because ultimately they don't care about all the cool stuff that makes this technically challenging. And we and our customers at Dataiku have found that this theme of resilience really resonates much better with the business. Obvious reasons over the last year why that might be the case. But no one can wait until the next pandemic to build this resilience, this mindset, this capability into our data team's ways of working. And we see MLOps as a critical component for that. Okay, so this is what I'll cover today. Some motivation, some education, and some action that you can take at the end. So first, we'll obviously talk about what is MLOps, what makes it so difficult, what good looks like. Then I'll give you some language that you're welcome to reuse to kind of reframe MLOps away from a technical challenge into a business capability that you want to build. Talk about how you can quantify the benefits of resilience, right? It can be difficult to explain that to business stakeholders, and highlight some of the costs of failure. And then, I'll quickly mention a few customer stories and additional resources where you can find out more. Okay, so here's a nice simple definition that we like to use. MLOps is simply the process and tools that allow organizations to safely scale the use of machine learning in production environments. So if you're at all familiar with MLOps, you'll notice all the keywords here, like production environments, safely, right? It's very easy to unsafely scale machine learning in production environments. We want to do that safely. But the important thing is it's not just about tools and technology, it's about processes as well. If anyone has any risks or mistakes they've made, or problems they've heard about with scaling machine learning in production, put them in the comments, put them in a question, and I'll share them with the audience if you're good enough to share those with me. So why, that definition is really simple, right? Why is it so difficult to solve in practice? And I think one of the reasons is that this, idealized cyclical model on the left here that we all learn some version of in our careers or in our education. This nice cyclical model, it really works great when you're describing teams of one or two building relatively small use cases. There isn't really that much of a process problem when it's a couple of people going round and round this circle and sharing their work. But actually doing this at scale and in large organization looks much more like the picture on the right, where we've got a huge range of practitioners, many different stakeholders, all these different stages, all these different technical concerns, business concerns. And so that's why we think, what sounds like this quite simple thing, safely scale machine learning in production environments. It turns out to be so difficult because we need lots of different people involved in that process, and they have different competencies. And some of you may have seen a paper by Google with this really great quote. It may be surprising to the academic community to know that only a tiny fraction of the code in many machine learning systems is actually doing machine learning. They're often about 5% machine learning code and at least 95% glue code. So it's the need to put all that glue together, which is what makes this such a challenging problem. And if we zoom out, these arrows are kind of the stages of MLOps, the considerations that we see. We can see in a simpler way kind of why there might be a tension here. Data people, the geeks in the room, we all love talking about those first three stages. How are we going to get the thing into production from a technical standpoint? And often there are incentives for data people to pay less attention to the last two stages, right? But actually, the job is not done when monitoring is set up, right? There needs to be a conscious plan to iterate and improve with business stakeholder input and to govern what is happening and the trade-offs that are inherent in putting any model in production. And so we see a lot of the content generated about MLOps is sort of biased to the left-hand side here, talking about the technical enablers. But a lot of that technical stuff, it's not easy, but all the tools exist. It's how you join that to the business value on the right, because even if a model is in production technically, right, it could be running but still not being used, still not connecting up to your business systems and changing decisions, changing actions. And for that, you need the business stakeholders to be just as interested in the benefits here as the technical people are. And there's an obvious way to solve this problem, which is to involve these business people in the conversation up front. But obviously that's sometimes easier said than done. But that's kind of the easy way to make this transition and use both these perspectives to make sure that all the effort you put into MLOps is actually driving value. So the challenges that you need to address, you will have heard these before. There's some purely technical ones. So across people, systems, languages, how do we actually take proofs of concept and playing around and make it fit to go into production from a technical point of view? How do we make it robust? It's not enough to put something in a container and have it running and generate an API endpoint. You need to know everything that's going on in there, just like any application. AI, ML projects introduce all kinds of risks, right? So operationally, things could go wrong. Legally, you might be doing the wrong things, or from a regulatory perspective, you might be generating risk as well. And because these models don't always have entirely predictable behavior, governance needs to be one of the challenges that you solve. And then how do you put a life cycle around that so that models don't get beautifully and smoothly deployed and very well monitored and then forgotten about, right? I think lots of organizations have models running that they don't know anymore how to iterate them or where they all are deployed. And so putting an actual life cycle around it is pretty important. So obviously the solutions to these are relatively obvious. But the rest of my discussion today is how you make the case to do these things, because these things cost time and cost money, right? If you have a use case pipeline to deliver, and then you go to your stakeholders and say, yeah, we need to have a route to deployment and seamless monitoring. We need even more of your involvement in governance, and we need to sync up how we manage these things with our general project management lifecycle. Some of them might be surprised because they thought that, you're smart people, you developed this new technology, you put it into practice. Why do you now need more time, more budget, and more of our involvement to do these other things? These were never part of what the dream was when you sold it to us. And we think that resilience is the language that underlies the business concept behind all these boxes, right? So there's a technology problem to solve in each of these boxes, but the people and process problems are much more complex. And the trick with people and process problems is when you solve them, you often don't see the payoff immediately. Whereas when the model is technically in production and some API is being called and some website now has better recommendations, you can see the impact of that and the value of that immediately. But it's tricky. How do you measure the value of project governance? It's sort of the thing. It's trying to measure a counterfactual you don't have. It's trying to explain why the things we do today will prevent disasters and bad news stories down the road. And so we think that this concept of resilience is a business-friendly way to explain why these solutions need to be solved, why these problems need to be solved in this way. And this is how we do it. So when we make this case with our customers or to our customers, we set a vision for the top of the mountain and why that generates value for the business. And what we call that realizing AI at scale. Then we explain how you need to get moving, right? And the most important part of getting moving is to start moving and then stay moving. And the most important thing you can do to make sure that happens is remove friction. So in your initial use cases, you want as little friction as possible, so you get going quickly, and that you carry momentum into this middle part of the story, part way up the mountain. And this is where we see customers really decide and need to invest more in MLOps. And the reason is, as you get higher up any mountain, the conditions change, right? So you need to not only maintain the use cases that you already delivered, you need to push into the unknown. You know where you're going, the top of the mountain, but as you go up a mountain, strange things happen in the atmosphere and your perspective, and you're inevitably exposed to much greater risk. And in our world, that could mean you had some great initial use cases, and then everything's going fine, and you're pushing into this danger zone, heading for the top, and then all of a sudden, your CTO decides to change cloud provider, right? Which didn't happen very often a few years ago, but now, if a different cloud provider comes along with a really great deal, CTOs are going to change cloud providers, right? So how can we be resilient to that? Or what if two of your competitors to your business emerge, and then customer behavior changes, right? And then the way you modeled customer decisions is no longer relevant? Or what if a global pandemic hits, and every single time series that you used in your forecasting kind of goes haywire and leaves the business blind? And all those kinds of problems are problems that resilience helps you overcome, because it's just risk mitigation, right? And again, so in this stage of your business case, this stage of your initiative, the reason to use business-friendly language is that the challenges are really the same. So we encourage people to talk about the changing cloud providers or custom competitors merging or pandemics hitting, talking about them like you would talk about any other risk, and handling them like you would any other risk, which is not to put them on a risk register and just leave them there forever, but to actually build resilience into your operations, where resilience is the ability to bounce back and keep going. So what is the investment you will make the case for so that you can be resilient to a change of cloud provider, resilient when the competitive environment changes and you need to quickly change or update the models that are in production? And then how will you understand the impact of a global pandemic and the gap in the data that might have generated on your ability to forecast the future? Again, that might be easy to explain why those are risks and why you need this thing called resilience to protect against those, but who's going to pay for that? I think, as I mentioned before, resilience is really a long-term capability investment that benefits all your use cases. It's not I'm going to save marketing $1 million a year with this use case. It's not, I'm going to improve our staff retention by 5%. It's a very different value story to the one that got you started. Those great value stories for particular use cases, that's what got people really interested at the beginning in the remove friction stage. But you need a different kind of story for these longer term investments as you try to build resilience. So how can you build that story? How can you quantify the costs in the danger zone, the costs of doing nothing, so that you can make a case to build resilience? And we use this metaphor of the iceberg. So as we all know, 80-90% of the iceberg is hidden under the waterline, right? And so it's very tempting to only focus on use case value and to only ever have a conversation with the business about the value of the recommendations that you improved, or the pricing model that you delivered, or the amount that you've reduced fraud through machine learning. But there are these risks below the waterline as you try to scale things, right, that are going to erode the value of those use cases, right? Those use cases need maintenance and further iteration. You need to deliver more use cases. But there are these risks that I was just talking about that we need to build resilience against that aren't obvious when we're talking about use cases and nice models that deliver clear benefits. It's that if your maintenance costs explode, right, which is one of the things that a robust MLOps setup is supposed to prevent happening. But if you were not to do that, your team efficiency would decrease because more and more time is spent on maintenance costs. There's all the things you haven't thought about, the events that might change the way the world works or change the way your data is generated. And then, there's always constant technology change that could be negative, as in, you're no longer allowed to use certain technology, or it could be positive in that there's some new technology that you want to leverage. And resilience is what allows you to take advantage of those opportunities. Now, risk and resilience, even if you're with me that, you need to have a narrative around those, they are not necessarily super energizing subjects for most people. So how can you make this tangible, right? Because you're going to need to ask for some investment or some time, at the very least some backing, to be able to build this capability. So the first under the waterline value that you can focus on is resilience to technology change. So whether you're migrating from some on-premise data warehouse to Snowflake or changing public clouds, you have to assume from the outset that that ground underneath you will shift. But you need to maintain, the time to value that you've achieved. And the risk and the cost here is that if you tie your AI initiative too closely to just one way of doing things, it's not a very attractive message for your stakeholders. What you want to do is build up the value of agility, right? And the way to do that is to talk about, well, when technology changes, we want to keep our models running in production as quickly as possible and not have to rebuild things at the same time over and over again. And if they give you that investment to protect against that risk, to build that resilience, then you can actually allow them to change things about the technology world that they need to. And you can actually concretely estimate this value. Everyone's rebuilt something in it before in a different technology, and it usually takes between 50 and 100%, and sometimes more than the original effort. Right? So you can do a simple calculation here on the time taken to build the use cases in the first place, and the cost that you're avoiding is the cost of those rebuilds, and if that cost can be avoided, that's an investment that then allows greater agility in the decision making of people who make the decisions about technology stacks. But it's not only technological change you need to be prepared for in advance and to build resilience against, it's business change as well. So we do sometimes hear about AI initiatives where technical people talk to the business in some workshops, then they went back to a black box for months and months to build something. And the problem with that is that the longer you stay locked away from business feedback, whether it's good or bad, the more potential you have to run off the road and get into really serious trouble. Again, you can reframe this negative into a positive by focusing on how the deep involvement by the business from the earlier stages that I mentioned at the start, preferably hands-on, that will increase the relevance and impact much more than it will slow things down. So to quantify this, we recommend that your initial use cases not actually be purely technical in nature, but they should explicitly prove to the business the value of this kind of collaboration. So instead of just building some models that will lead to some business impact, you need to go a bit further and make those initial use cases a little slower, a little more challenging, so that one of the things that they prove is that the business will get value from collaboration up front. And that helps you foresee all the kinds of risks that might be coming up. Once you have those headlights on, right, that's a crucial component of your resilience. And then the last one, here may not be something that you'd naturally include in a business case, but it's increasingly on the agenda as something organizations are worried about. And we know that increasing regulation is on the way in the sphere. So really what happens, the more you use AI, the more you're delegating decisions to those models that you've built. And sometimes they go wrong, just like any decision, right? And when they do, when they do, the headlines look terrible for those who let that happen. And even if those events are low probability, they're high in the bottom line impact. If you get fined or your name is dragged through the press alongside some, unflattering clip art of algorithms gone mad. So these are issues, they hopefully won't emerge in your initial use cases, but you need to build a story early on about what it will take to build AI responsibly from the start, because doing things responsibly, deliberately, and intentionally will slow you down, right? You will deliver the models into production slower by doing things more carefully. The narrative for the business is a positive payoff, right? By putting the good practices in up front, that will make you more agile in the long run, and you'll feel safer innovating. What happens when you don't build resilience? I'm not brave enough to show the video during the presentation, but there's a nice little 1-minute video. If you search AI memes and machine learning pipelines, you'll see, the consequences of not being resilient to all of these changes that can hit you once you're running. And what's some first concrete steps that you could take to get rolling? I think we see that a lot of people think that resilience and MLOps as a component of resilience, they think it's kind of tomorrow's problem or next year's problem, and that they need to get up and running first and then think about it. And that's fine, but if you only, not many of us only have that aspiration to run a few models in production. We want dozens or hundreds, right? Really making a big difference to the business. And so you need to think about that early. And so that's why I call that, planning to be wildly successful. You want to be modest initially, but be prepared to scale as things start to work for you. And as you do that, that marginal cost of the extra use cases has to go down. Otherwise, you reach a point when you've harvested all the low-hanging fruit, and if you haven't built, robust MLOps capability and resilience, right, to de-risk the next investments, they might actually be too risky or too expensive to make. And so, one of our customers, they were already doing potentially pretty good. Some people say it takes us 8 months to productionize a model. They were working to 8 weeks, but they reduced that to 2 weeks. And if you think about what that unlocks in terms of being able to react to change, that's really, really useful resilience for the business. Another thing you can do in any technology, right, is to prepare and protect yourself against data drift, right? So if the world changes, I talked about what if two of your competitors merge and then the market that you operate in changes significantly, people's behavior might change. The data that you trained the models on won't represent, the behavior that's happening in the future. And then your models might take quite unexpected decisions. And again, you could wait until that happens to try and clean up that mess, or you could use the opportunity when you're building the model, when someone's building a model and has those stakeholders involved, that's the best time to write down and encode those expectations about what the data should look like. And so there's a nice open source framework called Great Expectations that you can use to protect against these unannounced upstream data changes. And then building responsibly, all of this work is being done by humans who make mistakes. We're all building imperfect models, imperfect representations on biased data. And so data scientists need tools, support, and most importantly, incentives. There have to be reasons for good practice, not just punishments for bad practice. And if you can do that proactively, if you can build that kind of resilience, and certainly MLOps is part of that picture, because if you're this top secret customer of ours, auditors, regulators, people come and check on what you're doing. And again, when they come and check on what you've been doing, they expect to see an audit trail of how you built models, how you explain the decisions that you made. And so again, this is all about making a long-term investment earlier, which is going to cost time, which might cost money. And so you need to start using this language earlier and building that business case for resilience earlier. So just a few resources to leave you with. If you've got any questions that you'd like me to answer, I think we've got a few minutes left. So put your questions in the Q&A tab. A couple of free resources here. On the left is kind of a business-centric perspective on what MLOps is and why it's essential. So that's kind of more detail and supporting material on what I've discussed today. On the right is a bit of a Bible written by some of my colleagues. It's not specific to Dataiku or our technology. It's generic, and that's about kind of a technical deep dive into the various patterns, principles, processes you need to put in place in order to really scale MLOps to cover dozens or hundreds of models, which hopefully is your aspiration as well. Don't think any questions have come in, but I'll give you just a few more minutes. While you think of some questions, I will pitch tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, I'm facilitating a roundtable with Joachim Blix from BN Bank in the financial stream on ESG and the difficult road to pushing ESG initiatives and data into all areas of the financial sector. That's in the morning, and in the afternoon with Kim Nace from Group M, who was on the panel this morning, we're going to be talking about pushing personalization beyond the obvious things that most of us have been doing to date. Okay, if there's no further questions, please feel free to get in touch with me on the email address at the bottom, and I look forward to seeing you at the rest of the conference.